All right, so we are going to be starting training 3. Here we go, sharing screen. And so like I mentioned in the start of this training, we were able to do a little bit of a deep dive into the values of restorative justice yesterday. And today we're going to be talking about the stories that we may tell about our students, sort of the ways that we perceive them, and whether there are any new stories or alternative stories that we can tell. And so in the spirit of talking about stories, here is our icebreaker. If your life was a story, so like a movie, a book, a TV show, or a podcast, or anything else that you're interested in, what genre do you think it would be? And I want you to take a minute to think about that and maybe why you answer the way that you do. Anyone have any thoughts on this? Let's see in the chat. Thank you for sharing, Jorge. So your genre would be dramedy, because there's always issues you have to face, but you try your best to make yourself laugh.
Are we allowed to like speak instead of writing in the chat? Okay.
Absolutely.
I think mine would be adventure. It's pretty versatile. I mean, I hope there'd be some romance along the way and some comedy, maybe a little thriller, but I'm pretty sure adventure.
Adventure. Thank you for sharing, Trinity. And yeah,
You're
feel
welcome.
free to unmute yourself and share. Anyone else?
It could be like any show, right?
Yeah. What kind do you think it would be?
I would really go with like The Amazing World of Gumball.
Oh,
Just
yeah?
everything's like crazy right now, and it's getting all busy. And I don't know, I'm really into cartoons, and that it would be The Amazing World of Gumball for me.
Got all kinds of like crazy, larger than life characters.
Yeah, sometimes it really does feel like that, in the way that the characters are expressed is really funny.
I see psychological thriller for 20 years and then adventure for the last 3 years. Yeah, so maybe sometimes the stories that you're telling have changed over time, for sure. I think mine would be like maybe like a magical realism or urban fantasy, where like different things that I've faced are maybe their own characters. I'm not quite sure, but I like to be able to think about it and like what it would look like. I think sometimes it like looked like horror from the outside, but I'm not sure if it felt like it. So all kinds of different things. Well, thank you for everyone who has shared in the chat. We're really going to focus on this theme of stories today. And especially how that's going to show up with our students. All right, I see a really boring slice of life, the most mundane thing you've ever seen, and I see novella. Family Guy. All right, we got all kinds of different answers. Thank you for this. And you could even go further and like, what would the music be like? What sort of scenery would there be? I think this is sometimes can be a really interesting question. But we're gonna move forward. All right, we're not gonna do breakout rooms today because I think that the energy is a little better if we're all in one group. But I would like to have a couple people share out. We'll start with volunteers and then we'll move into cold call. And I have these sort of 3 questions. So, what was one thing you got in trouble for as a child? How did the adults in your life respond? And what did you learn from their responses? Take a minute to think about that one and let it sink in. And then I would love to see some hands, and if not, we'll do some calls. Jenna, go for it.
Hello.
Hi.
Hi. So, um, one thing that I got in trouble for when I was a kid was when I was in like 4th grade. And I don't know if any of you guys had to do this, but every week my class would have to do like a reading log where we would have to read for like 20 minutes or something, and then your parent would sign off on it.
Mhm.
And at the time, I hated reading like a lot. So I just never turned them in. And then I think my mom found out about it somehow, and she got like really, really mad at me. And then I think she ended up grounding me too. And I guess what I learned from my mom's response was that like I should probably take school a bit more seriously so that doesn't happen again.
So you learned to take it more seriously, although there was some punishment involved in the grounding and such. Is that about right? Am I hearing you?
Yeah, that's good. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Okay. Let's have a couple more people share. Thank you for that, Jenna. I'm really appreciating hearing some new voices today. All right, let's see, participants.
Ray?
Yes, Ray, please.
So one thing I got in trouble for was when I was a kid, I used to like be really afraid of the dentist, and it'd get so bad that like while I was in the seat, I'd freak out so much they couldn't really get any work done. So my parents got pretty upset, like because I just couldn't get unafraid like that, and it, like, which is fair because it was costing them money for each appointment that I showed up to, and they couldn't even get any work done, so they had to keep redoing it, like saying, oh, maybe this time he'll, like not squirm and not freak out. So that was like one thing I like got in a lot of trouble for, because like I said, but I guess what I learned from it was, to try and control like my emotions better. Like for fear example, it took a couple more times after that, like when they first got like really, really mad, but I eventually like got over it, and now like I'm not even afraid of the dentist. So I think it all ended out pretty well.
So they were upset, but it also took time for you to learn to work through those emotions.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Okay. And let's see. I'm gonna read in the chat. Yeah, Amy, you say I got in trouble. I got in trouble for failing a class. My mom made fun of me and teased me about it. I learned that failing at anything was not okay and spent most of my young life trying to be perfect. So I think sometimes we have those like hard-earned lessons in terms of like, oh, I was afraid at the dentist and I had to get over my fear. But a lot of times also, yeah, you may learn, oh, there's something wrong with me, or, oh, I need to be different because what I'm doing isn't good enough. And Jessica, thank you for sharing. I was hungry last week and ate some food my parent made, got me in trouble and said I can't touch her food. Yeah, what did you learn from that? That sounds like it was more of a recent thing. I'll share one as well. One thing I got in trouble for as a child, and I think I've talked about this, it's kind of similar to what you were describing, Jenna. I was also not a homework doer. And I would avoid doing my homework and not start it and stuff. And I would also be dishonest about it. And especially as I started to get older, I would just tell my parents or whoever was taking care of me, like, oh yeah, I don't have homework. Oh, this teacher never gives homework. And I definitely got in trouble for that as I got older and as, they realized that I wasn't being honest. But to be honest, what I learned from that, and I'm just going to be real with y'all, I didn't necessarily learn don't be dishonest. I kind of learned don't get caught, and it didn't really help me change my behavior. And that's why I really want to talk about the stories that we're telling about students, and the stories that we tell to ourselves, because you may have students who kind of learn a lesson, but you may also have students who do learn don't get caught. And we want to be able to help all of those students. So I'm seeing more responses here. You don't remember your age, but your cousins were over. You started playing with mud. You got whooped. And then I also hear not everything in life is fair, but we need to fend for ourselves. Okay, yeah. So some of those harder lessons when you're young, sounding like a lot of people learned those. So the reason I talk about this is because I do think it's kind of central to continuing to build that restorative mindset, which sometimes can be different from what we grew up with, but it's definitely important. It's definitely an alternative. So here we go. So here's what I really want to get across. If I can get across one thing, I think it would be people are people and problems are problems. And I think it's really important to remember that our students are not the same thing as their actions. So instead of somebody being a dishonest person or an anxious person or any number of those, you know, they're a whole individual first, and then we try to figure out how we're going to help with problems. I think it's really important to try and see this other side of them. And part of that is because it helps with tutor stress, student relationship, and connection with parents. So just think of the pressures of, oh my gosh, I have to fix what's going on with the student, and of all of the harm that can sometimes do, the way of maybe talking with parents, but only talking about, oh, your student is doing something wrong, and some of the stress that can create in a relationship. Research shows that kind of thinking and that kind of mindset of like, oh my gosh, there's so much wrong and I have to fix it, often actually leads to burnout, because it's really hard to solve these things. So I want to kind of bring in 2 other mindsets to add on top of that, that may help with that. Apart from that, I think being able to change this mindset, change this perspective, is a really good way to challenge implicit bias and sort of the problematic stories and stereotypes that our society often tells and often repeats. And lastly, my goal is that it'll provide a new perspective to help our At Promise youth grow, because they may get those stories of like, you're having problems and you're the same as your problems, throughout, you know, the school system, maybe sometimes from home, maybe from other sources. So just like we're providing an alternative to the way that justice looks in schools, I think we're also sometimes providing new perspectives for those students. So with that, I know that was a little bit text heavy. We're gonna go with a shorter one. So I am wondering if I could just have a couple people share out, what is a deficit? What does that word mean? Lack of. Thank you, Kellen. Yeah, exactly. Deficit is like what's missing. And I wonder, would you agree or disagree that this is maybe one of the ways that people talk about students or about youth, especially right now? Like, oh, what are they missing? What's wrong? What do I need to add in? Yeah. Can you give an example, maybe how you've heard that, Jessica?
Like whenever a teacher wants to come to the tutors and talk about a student, they say like, oh, they're lacking in these, like probably like obedience or whatever. So we should try to be more positive.
Yeah, like, oh, the first thing that you know about someone is, oh, they lack motivation, or the first thing you get is they're failing. And Amy adds in, yeah, they don't know how to do this, they can't do this, they lack respect. And one other that I think is kind of some language that we have used post-pandemic about learning loss, even just centers, oh, hey, here's what's wrong with the students. Students have learned things even when they weren't in school, even if they weren't the things that we expected that they learned. Like, life changed, but it didn't stop. So I think that this deficit thinking can show up a lot within the schools. If it's, they don't care, or they're not ahead, or anything like that. And it might sometimes be true that, oh, okay, this person is behind in reading. But I don't think that should be the first thing about them. I'm going to share a few pictures right here, kind of going with this deficit. So what do you see when you look at these pictures? Can you all see the pictures okay? All right. I would love to have a couple people share, as you look at these, what is some of your reaction to what you're seeing? Students are empty of knowledge and teachers are knowledge holders. Thank you, Callan. Anybody else? Where do you think that perspective comes from, that students are empty of knowledge and teachers are knowledge holders? Can you speak to that a little, Callan?
I learned it in one of my education theory classes. I don't remember which theorist came up with it, but it kind of stuck to me because a lot of teachers expect you to just not like provide feedback. That's why the education system is slowly integrating discussion-based learning. So it's mostly one-sided.
Yeah. And I think that there's nothing wrong with having knowledge. Like, I think a lot of times we get the message of like, knowledge is power. But sometimes what doesn't really happen is figuring out, what do students already know? And can that be just as important as what we're trying to teach them? So I know this is new to some of you. And I want to respect that everyone's going to come at it in a different place. Yeah. And there's also this thing of like shoving knowledge down their brains without seeing if they're grasping the knowledge, or saying, hey, you need to know this because you need to know it, rather than explaining to them, why it's important. And that can just be, that's a really, really common mindset, and one that I think, just like we could kind of try to challenge punishment in our discipline, we also want to challenge that. And the bottom picture, okay, yeah, Leslie, that maybe only the students with the wings get the attention from teachers that they need. Yeah, what's happening to all of the other students? Maybe they get treated as closed-minded, or like, oh, you don't understand, you're not going to get it. So I'm going to focus on the students who are focused, who are ready to go. I appreciate that. Thank you for sharing that, everyone in the chat. And it supports a one-size-fits-all theory. So it looks like teachers are using one teaching method, but maybe not every student is going to get it. And then maybe teachers say, well, I don't know what to do with that student. I don't know how to help them. They're not listening, or I don't have the time. And the reason I bring these up is because, again, tutoring and KEEP are supposed to be an alternative to what students are getting. We're doing things differently. So we want to look at how are things happening to start. So with that, I'm hoping that this will become a little clearer in a video that we're about to watch. So we're going to look at sort of two voices on behavior. We're going to look at strengths. When there's a behavior, how can we view it positively? How can we see what it says about a student and shows their strengths and give it, an outlet, encourage using it in a healthy way. And we're going to look at students' needs, what they need that maybe they're not getting. We're going to move back and forth between these. And I think this is going to become a little clearer in a TED Talk I would like to share. This is about 7 minutes. If anybody needs a transcript, I can try and provide it after the fact. But I'm going to go ahead and, first of all, new share. Make sure that I can share sound. And I'm going to go ahead and play this for you. And I'd just like to hear what comes up. It's a little bit of a longer video than any of the ones that we've watched, but I think it really puts a lot of this into perspective. So here we go. Can y'all hear? Thank you.
An exasperated father asked his son's high school principal what career his son should consider in the future. Now, his son was described by many of his teachers as lazy, distracted, and that he couldn't remember anything. So the principal replied to the father, and he said, "It doesn't matter what he does, he will never amount to anything." That father's name was Herman, and that student who wouldn't amount to anything, that was his son, Albert Einstein. Now, before you and I start thinking poorly of that principal from 1895, we have to admit something. We've all been that principal. We unintentionally overlook a kid's raw and unrefined talent because that very talent tends to first bubble to the surface as an annoyance. And as a dad, I'm guilty of this myself 100%. My son will be like, "Hey, Dad, do you want to play Legos?" And I'm like, "Yeah, just a minute." And then he goes and sets a 60-second timer and stands there staring at me the entire time. I'm glad you find his persistence amusing. I find it annoying. But here's my question. What if a kid's most annoying trait is actually their biggest talent in disguise? Meaning, what if a kid's greatest asset first presents itself as a giant pain in your asset? And if that is true, how do we not make the same mistake as Einstein's principal and unintentionally overlook genius simply because it first says hello as an annoyance? Well, over the last 40 years, the Gallup Research Organization has conducted more than 2 million interviews with successful people. And an interesting commonality emerged amongst these interviews. They found that successful people identify and refine their talents so that their talents become their strengths. Now, good for those people, but the question is, then how does a kid move from annoying trait to talent to strength to success? Well, I'm going to argue it's because that kid has at least one caring adult in their life who does the following, who redirects the annoyance and cultivates the talent. Lonnie's mother was excellent at this. Lonnie was meddlesome and mischievous, always getting into things. As a kid, he almost burned down his family's home because he attempted to cook rocket fuel on the stove. As you do. Lonnie's mother, bless her, she didn't lose her cool as you might think. She had the patience or the wherewithal or the blood alcohol level to see past this. Notice that her son had a scientific curiosity. She redirected him, said, hey, that's good, let's get you a hot plate. Why don't you take this outside somewhere more safe? Lonnie Johnson holds more than 80 patents and is the inventor of the national treasure, the Super Soaker. Which is, amazingly, approaching $1 billion in sales. And with Lonnie's cut of those proceeds, he founded his own research firm, which works on inventions related to clean energy. Now, Nancy had a teacher who did this for her. Nancy, as a kid, was described as loud, opinionated, overzealous. She once hijacked the microphone at a school assembly in order to advertise this new student club that she was starting. A student club which sought to convince world leaders to participate in nuclear disarmament. Not surprisingly, no random high school kid showed up to that club. But a teacher took notice of this, that Nancy was a leader, albeit a bit overzealous, taught Nancy, hey, here's how you get people on board with your ideas, how you recruit people towards your ideas. Nancy Lublin went on to recruit thousands of volunteers for the Crisis Text Line, which provides 24/7 crisis intervention for young people who are deeply distressed and even suicidal. They've processed more than 28 million text messages and saved countless lives. And then there's Mrs. Wilhite. She had this kid in her class. Loud, constantly disrupting, constantly talking, making everything a joke, the class clown kid. One day, Mrs. Wilhite pulls him aside, says, hey, you should sign up for speech and debate. Because I don't know if you ever thought about this, but I think you could be a gifted communicator. And I will never forget when Mrs. Wilhite said those words to me. And you are listening to me speak today because she did. She didn't get annoyed by me, though she had every right to be. I was incredibly immature and sophomoric as a kid in her Spanish class. I would do annoying things like I would ask her, hey, Mrs. Wilhite, how do you say the phrase, I would earn in Spanish? Knowing full well this would force her to say aloud, yo gonorrhea. Gracias. Yet, despite my finely tuned immaturity, she looked past it. She redirected the annoyance, and she cultivated the talent. You see, every kid needs one caring adult, like Mrs. Wilhite, in their life. An adult to be patient where others might be pestered. So when that kid in your life inevitably annoys you, let's be honest, likely in the next 24 hours, because they're constantly getting into stuff, or they're argumentative, or they're annoying, take a deep breath and consider in that moment that you too might just have your very own genius sitting right in front of you. Thank you very much.
Whoops, we are not playing that again. Okay. So I would really like to hear if anybody has any perspectives or reactions or what stood out to you with this video, because I think it's a little different from any time that we've talked about discipline before. Jessica, go for it.
Yeah, I'm a very strong believer of those students that they misbehave, they don't pay attention, they don't do their work. They're one of the smartest kids because they think that everything is easy and they just want to get over with. They're like, okay, what's next? But as they're waiting, what's next? the other students need time to catch up and they don't know what to do with their boredom, and the teacher gets frustrated with them instead of realizing, oh wow, like this kid is sharp, he needs something a little more complicated, or I need to pay more attention to him to see how I can help him.
Thank you for sharing. Yeah, and in fairness, it can be really hard sometimes for teachers to keep track of that when they've got a ton of students to look after and they're overwhelmed and have to do a ton of extra things, which I think is one of the powers of tutoring, that you can be that caring adult and you have the space. Cassandra, go for it.
I remember in my classroom, I experienced myself at least like 2 or 3 kids that were labeled as bad or disruptive and that would mess around. And I remember these kids, they did have a bit of an attitude sometimes, but when I would sit next to them and actually take the time to see, okay, what are we learning today? They would show me and they would finish it so quick because they were so smart, and they would finish it quickly and then misbehave because they didn't know what else to do. And instead of the teachers or the tutors looking at the good they were doing, they would only see the bad things that they would do after they were done, which was be disruptive.
Thank you for sharing, Cassandra. Anybody else have reactions to this?
So the money went from your account to Venmo to the. Okay, what I think can cause an issue.
I think it really points out, we've talked in previous trainings about how so many of us have had, you know, have had teachers that were going through the motions, and then some have had teachers that really, you know, saw you. Those are the teachers that sort of become mentors. But I think that involves, you know, noticing where something is getting really frustrating and trying to figure out what potential it might have, and maybe what the positive side of it is. If a student is, you know, talking back, is that show that they're really curious? If a student is disruptive, could they maybe be a leader? And that's really a frame that I want to think about as we continue with this training. Anybody else? Anything jumping out to you? Anything that you're going to hold on to from this? Argumentative, could they be a lawyer? That's something I said to one of my students one time. I was like, you should be a lawyer. And then we talked about it. So this really, I think, is a good example of that strengths perspective. And it takes time to develop that. The other thing that I like about this video in particular is that he doesn't say, don't be annoyed. Like, you're gonna be annoyed because sometimes these things can be really frustrating, especially if you've already had a long day, if you're already overwhelmed. So it's like a yes and, like, okay, feel annoyed and accept that, and then figure out how you're gonna reframe it and how you're going to support that student and see the good in them. And I think one thing that people have also said as we've been sharing reactions has been sorry, give me a minute, has been that a lot of times when you get the students, they are labeled already with disruptive or unmotivated or argumentative or any number of these behaviors. So then it can be a little bit of extra work to find those positives, but it's so important to find those positives wherever they are, just like we talked about yesterday when we were talking about PBIS. I'd like to hear a couple more reactions. Could we maybe do a couple cold calls, Lauren?
Sure, I'm gonna pick on Rachel.
Hey, Rachel.
Hi. So one of my reactions was that students or children in general who have weak support systems at home, they can be like, this can turn around for them from their tutors and their teachers. Like, you can be that one person, let's say all of their relatives, even their teachers, their classmates, they're all underestimating them. You as a tutor, you as a mentor, you can be that that one person that completely changes their lives just simply by believing in them.
Yeah, thank you. And even just, I think, being willing to look and say, what is this student doing well? Or what does this behavior show? How can I strengthen that? Isabel, go for it.
So for me, I would say, like, for example, I worked with the high school students last year, and
Mhm.
they would be like considered as like the troubled ones, and like they would always be called on by like the principal. They would always get into trouble with the students, with the teachers. And I would even talk to some of the teachers, and they would like tell me all these things about how they don't do their work or anything. And then when I would talk to the students, they would tell me like, oh, like, why, like, this class is pointless, like, why are we not learning about this? And I like tell them like it's understandable, and like we all been there, but
Mhm.
like it's just kind of just like the way their perspective is, and they're seen as like bad kids, and like we tell them like you're not a bad kid. Like, they're like so sweet and so like enthusiastic about things and so passionate about like certain subjects, but when it comes to subjects that like you don't really need, like that's when they start getting like kind of like they talk back, get argumentative. And that's when like I just have to tell them like some teachers, like how yesterday somebody mentioned, like they're just there for the paycheck, so it kind of sucks. And when they realize that, like they kind of like lose respect for them. So I just find that like it's really like the TED Talk was really like true. So yeah.
Mm-hmm. Thank you for sharing that, especially with working with the teenagers, because a lot of people would be like, oh no, I can't do teenagers. How do you think that changes the relationship that you have with the students? The
With
way
them
that
being
you're
teenagers?
No, I mean, in terms of like, listening to them and explaining that and seeing kind of the, the sweet side or the bright side or any of those good traits in them. Do you think it's a different
The
relationship than they have with their teachers?
I would think so, yes, because I know some of the teachers that, let's say, would say they're argumentative or something, like they might not have respect for them because they just see the bad. And like some students do know like I'm not a bad person, but others may be like bummed out about it. So just the fact that, like, let's say for example me or some of the other teachers that like would know like I understand that, like they kind of feel like that trust where they can like tell you about their problems, and it just builds a trust because like they're being heard and they understand that, like, regardless, like you have to pass a class, but it's not because you need it in life type of thing. It's just kind of like how messed up sometimes the education system can be.
Right.
And like it also helps them like understand like in the future like how like what they want to do, because like they realize like how the education system is, and they might want to like redirect themselves into what they want to do. So yeah.
Yeah, and maybe that's a challenge where you're sort of validating, I don't really like the way that this gets taught, but here's how it could connect to something that you're interested in, or like making those connections, making sure teachers know how they're feeling and that they're not feeling respected and all of that. So thank you for sharing. I think it really shows how that relationship can be different. I saw another hand. Was that Jessica?
Yeah, that was me.
Hey.
I just want to say that it's a sad reality because there's going to be teachers out there that they don't see the true gifts that their student has. And it's hard to tell sometimes for, some teachers or tutors, because not even the student themselves know what they have, what their potential is. And so that's why it's important to, keep like special attention on that student from far, like as you're caring for all the other students, like use your side eye to try to pay attention to that student a little more and be like, you know what, this student, I think he's calling out for something, for help, or I need more attention because I feel like this is too easy for me. I need a challenge.
And I'm going to challenge you all in terms of that. maybe, you're not able to do that with every single student that you have. That's why there's more than one tutor at a site. So this is a place to really, talk with each other and coordinate with each other. And hey, I'm going to be checking on so-and-so today. And I also just, the reason that I suggest why we do check-ins when we start an activity like this or a training like this is I want you to check in with yourself and how you're feeling, because it may be that feeling of annoyance that you're getting, because let's be real, it happens, isn't just, oh, a bad thing I need to push away. It might be saying, oh, hey, this is a behavior that I really want to be curious about and see what the student is trying to say with it. So I wanted to share that because I think it is kind of another perspective that we don't always talk about, because no one wants to be annoyed, but we also know that it happens. And that goes along with having permission to not be perfect. So we're going to talk a little more about strengths. So we're actually going to practice this and look at behavior through a strengths perspective. So here's a list of behaviors. I'll read them out. And what I want you to do is I want you to think about this and pick the one that, as you think about it, it stresses you out the most, or it's the most frustrating. And I want you to think about what kind of a strength that behavior could show. And if you want me to give an example of how I would do that, I will. But I'm first just going to read these off. And as I read them off, just kind of sit with, like, if there's anything you feel in your body, if you tense up or you go, oh, I hate when that happens, just pay attention to that, okay? Just notice. So here we go. Dishonesty. Getting anxious or easily upset. Tattling. Shutting down or avoiding a task or conversation, like you can just never get them to start something. Or being disruptive in the session. So those are the behaviors that we're going to be looking at today, just as some examples. And first, I want to have a couple people share out which one of these kind of tenses you up the most or stresses you the most, and maybe why. I'll give a minute for you to think. And if that is challenging, I can also start us off. And if there are any, oh, sorry, Trinity, I just saw you. If there are any behaviors that you would want to add to this list, feel free. These were just the ones that I sort of grabbed off the top of my head from sessions that I've had. But I think I saw you.
Okay, yeah, I'm sorry. I wouldn't want to say that any of these are like one is more stressful than the other. I don't think I want to have the mindset that, oh my God, this is so stressful for me. This is something that the kids do that stresses me out. I don't even want to come in with that approach. I mean, I'm realistic and I can understand that these are stressful things, but I think what stands out to me the most is getting anxious / easily upset, because this was most relatable to me throughout my teens and maybe earlier youth. I see it more as being emotional. There's nothing wrong with carrying emotion and being really passionate about something. I think getting anxious or easily upset just shows their passion or their ability to try to change a perspective or show you their side. So I think I really like that one because, like I said, again, there's nothing wrong with being emotional. And I think that when these emotions pop up, that's automatically what we think we correlate it to negativity, and it's not.
Thank you. Yeah, Thank you so much for sharing that, Trinity. That's exactly what I'm talking about, that maybe somebody, so maybe it's not, this is how you see a student, but you know that somebody else might see a student that way. We can think of it like that. So yeah, if you have a student who someone says, oh, this person is really sensitive or really anxious, you might think of that as like, this person really cares. This is a passionate person. And then how can I work with a passionate person? I see a couple other raised hands. Carlos, go for it.
Yes, the behavior that mostly calls my attention from this list is shutting down, avoiding tasks, or avoiding conversation. And I feel this behavior is especially difficult to work with because you need to be constant, and also you sometimes not see any way of helping the student because they shut down, and it's only through time that you're able to get them out of the shell and get them to talk to you. And it's so hard. Once I had a student that that was like not doing the work, and then when I tried to approach her, she would just shut down on me, not talk to me, not talk to anybody. And it was only through a lot of time and patience that she started to feel confident and talk to me and tell me, I'm not feeling good. And then I would tell her, oh, why are you not feeling good today? What is wrong today? Or how can we make things better? How can we get you to work or pay attention? Or if we were to do this, would you be able to work on this assignment because it's really helpful? And well, something positive that I see on this behavior is maybe the kids are a lot in their mind, and maybe they have trouble, some problems going on at home, but they have really they have a big capacity of being a lot in their heads and imagining a lot of things. So they're really creative most of the time. And I can kind of play around with that concept, and I let their imagination solve their problems. Like I remember I told this girl, what if we go outside for a couple of minutes and then you can refill, because she said she was hungry, and then you refuel, you eat this lunch that you brought, and then we can go back to the classroom, and then you're able to continue with today's lesson. And she was like, okay, I can go now. And while she was eating, I was asking her, okay, you refueled, then we can go back, and you're gonna pay attention to the teacher, right? Because I used to be a teacher assistant. And she actually did, and that's how we play with imagination, just for them to feel motivated to keep going.
Thank you for that story, Carlos. It sounds like you were able to kind of work with that student and meet her in the middle, and also value, yeah, hey, if somebody is really quiet, if they're shutting down, that there could be some other needs, and they could also be, hey, this person is better at being in their head, so let's figure out how to value that. I might even add to shutting down, and this could be kind of challenging to think about, but this may be a way that a student has learned to protect themselves. Like, okay, I don't feel safe yet, so I'm going to try and make myself safe. And then, we're sort of doing what we can to help them to feel safe, to share or to participate or any of that. We'll talk about that in a minute as we talk about our needs perspective. Let's see. And I see in the chat a couple of other people have shared. Yeah, Jorge, you say when you see somebody who is anxious or very quickly upset, it sounds like you have kind of that empathetic response in terms of, oh, okay, I got to calm myself down because I'm feeling your anxiety. And I see Amy saying dishonesty, because I was called a liar by adults who should have helped me as a kid. Now, when I notice students who are dishonest, it touches a nerve. I'm working on it. And Jessica says, okay, people that shut down, sometimes they're deep thinkers. Yeah. So I'm really glad that you all are kind of looking at this strengths perspective, because I think that's the first step. So first step is noticing, okay, this is a behavior that maybe I'm struggling with, and maybe that doesn't happen for everyone the same way. But I definitely know it happens for me, and we have permission to not be perfect. So, you notice the behavior, and then you're curious and like, oh, okay, this is getting under my skin, taking care of yourself, figuring out why it's getting under your skin. And then also, what kind of strength could it show? Yeah, I'm really appreciating some of the sharing in the chat. We're going to continue this as we do our second day of lab. We're actually going to like talk through some of these behaviors in real time and figure out, okay, what would we do here? I want to do one more. I would like to hear from somebody who maybe wants to try this with a student who is often disrupting the session. Maybe they're the class clown or they're goofing off. Can somebody share a strength that they might see in that student?
I actually was working on that one because that was the one that touches the biggest nerve for me.
That's your hot button?
Yeah, it is. I think because it flusters me, but for me, I think the strength I put down was they're not afraid of speaking up. Yeah, confidence.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, exactly, Jose. Yeah, I think that's a really valuable trait, but when it happens, it's hard to see.
Oh, I know. And that's the challenge. That's why we're talking through it now, to kind of practice that slowing down and being curious so that it's easier to do in the moment. Yeah, I see public speaker right there, future salesman, leadership, all of that. All right. So I think you are all getting kind of the hang of this, and I'm really glad. Like I said, I think it's something that a lot of times we do unconsciously, but I want to bring it to the surface and really start to build that mindset, not just, maybe not just in tutoring, maybe this is something that you see in other parts of your life too, but definitely, especially for tutoring. All right, so let's see, what's my next slide? All right, we're gonna move on to nurturing strengths and community roles. So quick check pop quiz. We talked about this yesterday. Raise your hand if you remember. Justice for Youth mentors at Promise Youth to become better students, better people, and Amy.
Oh, we can let somebody else answer it.
All right, let's let someone else answer. Indira says,
raise your hand.
Oh, yes, I did. Indira says better leaders. Yes, absolutely. I love how quick you were with that. Thank you, Indira. So if we're gonna try and help students become better leaders, I'm gonna share some ways we can do that, but I actually first want to hear from you. What are ways that you can mentor those students to be better leaders? Or ways that you have done this in the past? All right, I am gonna jog your brain. Here's a few. So one way would be to give them leadership roles. And this is just kind of a basic set of ideas. There we go, give them leadership roles during tutoring. Basic ideas for a student who maybe does need a little bit of extra stuff to do, or a student who is bored, or a student who has finished things quickly. So could be that you're having them pass out papers or materials for an activity or a lesson. They could help you be a line leader or a caboose, taking the back of the line with another tutor if you're going from place to place. They could be a homework helper, go around and help out the students, especially older to younger students, if you know them and they know the material. They could be a new student buddy and help new referrals understand, hey, this is what it's like in KEEP. Here's what to expect. This might be really good for some of those students who are kind of anxious and they need to know what's going on. Maybe they need a buddy, or maybe they, once they're starting to get comfortable in KEEP, they might be able to be a buddy for someone. A timekeeper or a schedule keeper, reminding you when there's a few minutes till they shift, or hey, don't forget everyone, it's supper time, or so on. A messenger, if you maybe have to go from one space to another. Somebody who helps with hand sanitizer, and you could come up with all kinds of names for these and be really creative with this. Custodian or recess helper. Even just, hey, can I have you help me bring out the equipment to the playground? Could really help a student to feel seen and heard. So this is a non-exhaustive list, and you get to decide what it's going to look like at your site. If this is something that you want to do, if you want to have students volunteer for jobs, or you want to ask them, or you want to, sometimes I've read of people even having students quote unquote apply for jobs and say, hey, this is why I want to do this in the session. But I just wanted to bring some basic leadership ideas to the forefront, so that you can think about, hey, maybe this student can help me out, and it'll give them something to do, and it'll help them to feel valued. And it might be a way of, working smarter, not harder. So you can help a couple students while you have someone pass out papers. I think strategy is really important when we're working with big groups. And Vanessa says, yes, we have a job list, and all the students get a job and change jobs in the beginning of the session. How does that work for you, Vanessa?
It works pretty good. I mean, so everybody, we just make a big list, and then we'll leave like a couple extra spots. And then, like we have a whole list of jobs. So if they don't like the job, then they get to switch, and then, whatever open job there is. So I mean, it works out pretty well.
Awesome.
Gives them a good leadership and
And maybe this is a place also for that positive praise and that relationship building. And just, hey, thank you so much. You were such a good line leader today. For a student who maybe has been not as motivated, it might be that little piece of their being seen for something that's not just, oh, I'm a troublemaker. And that can kind of change the way they see themselves and the way that you see them. So I love hearing that people have been doing this, either changing jobs each session or picking them randomly. And like I said, you may have even more jobs than this, but I just wanted to throw those out for anyone. All right, let's see. Any other thoughts or reactions on some of this strengths-based stuff and reframing so far? All right, then we are going to move on. I also just wanted to bring this piece in. There is this concept of, yes, I think we should call them leadership roles. I like that a lot. This concept of cultural wealth is just all of the things that people often learn to do within family, or stuff that maybe isn't always respected as like, hey, this is also, knowledge that you have. It's not necessarily something that you learned in school. It's something that you learned from family. And I just bring this up because I think when students bring these things up of like, hey, my family taught me this, or my culture taught me this, it's really important to just affirm how much that matters. So these were just some examples of students sharing what sort of values they got from their family, with this particular focus on our Spanish speaking students. And that's another piece of relationship, is just, hey, I know this really matters to you, so thank you for sharing it with me. We can definitely talk more about this in depth. I think it's a whole topic, and I definitely think that having a training where we zoom in on culture and working in schools would be important. But we're sort of just looking at it here. I wonder if anybody kind of relates to this, or maybe they see kind of parallels, like, oh, I also learned this. You can feel free to share any reactions in the chat, or again, unmute yourself, feel free. Go for it, Jessica.
Yeah, something positive I have noticed, like compared to when I was in elementary to now, is like culture wise, they've put more credit on students that know more than one language, because they realize like that's actually a good thing. Like, okay, like you honestly, you're smarter when you know more than one language. It could be any language. And I remember when I was younger, they would put us in ELD. They would force us to learn English. You cannot speak Spanish in school. You have to only know English. And that would kind of hold us back because, you know, we're gifted to know another language, but we can't use it. But now that school system has shifted that, and that's a good thing that I have noticed, and I really like that.
Thank you for sharing that, Jessica. That's exactly what I'm talking about, that those are strengths that aren't always recognized, or maybe schools are starting to recognize them more than they did in the past, but there's still a long way to go. So yeah, I just think that as we look at student strengths, we're looking at them not only in their behaviors, but also in, hey, what knowledge do they already come in with? And how can we celebrate that as well? Because that's going to help to build that respect, that relationship, help them belong in a community. So I just wanted to make sure that we name that as we're talking about strengths. And I think even the strength of, hey, I'm able to move forward and be resilient even when, you know, I'm dealing with a lot of hardship. That's a strength. Justice for Youth, I know we talk a lot about resilience, but that doesn't always happen as much in the wider world. So yeah, being able to name it. And Amy says, I used to ask my students who spoke Spanish, help a student who didn't, but whose online homework was in Spanish. So there may even be that helper component where students are able to help each other. All right. So moving forward, that's our next slide. So now we're going to shift gears slightly, checking in with all of you, being respectful of time. How are you doing? Do we need a brain break? Or shall we keep going? You're good. All right. Thank you, Carlos. I guess it helps that our trainings are not quite as long. All right. If anybody really needs a break or needs to turn off their camera, use the restroom, get some water, please do. I'm going to keep going. So we've got this strengths perspective, and that's important. Being able to reframe, oh my gosh, this student is dishonest, into this student is creative, this student is a good storyteller, and I got to figure out ways for them to do that that are, you know, healthy and helpful. So we got that down. There's another perspective for us to think about, and that is a needs perspective. And this is just, I think, recognizing that students might have, you know, needs that aren't being met based on context, including, you know, their background, some of the barriers that they're up against, you know, in society, and then also life experiences. And I think noticing that a student has a need and it needs to be met or it needs to be addressed is still not, oh, there's something wrong with this person. So the questions here that I would really want you to answer, really be curious about, would be, how can I best support this student or get them what they need? And also, hey, what's a barrier for this student right now? So for example, language. Hey, I don't have a tutor who's speaking my native language. That's a barrier. That's making it harder for a student to succeed. And then also access for students with disabilities, students with ADHD, autistic students. Hey, are they getting the support and the accommodations that they need? Maybe they're not, and maybe that's making it harder to succeed. But it's not the student's fault. It's something that's in the way. And we need to figure out, how are we going to get that out of the way? How are we going to shift? I would also say this perspective includes, thinking about trauma and whether a student is acting the way that they are because of things that have happened in their past. So we always want to be sensitive to that and aware of that, and the fact that everyone's reality looks different. So we're going to talk about some sort of basic needs and just like a couple models for thinking about them. There are so many more than this, but I think it's kind of covers our basics. So has anyone ever seen this pyramid before? It's pretty common in psychology. Is this looking familiar? Yep, Amy says yes. Anybody else? Trinity says yeah. Lauren says Maslow's. Hey Trinity, can you tell me a little about this pyramid and what you see and what you know?
Yeah, I actually saw this pyramid in my boyfriend's psychology class. I helped him make his own pyramid, and I believe the teacher was not going to hand out any A's to students who did the self-actualization tier because she says that a lot of people haven't reached it yet. And then I think he did do it, and he still got an A because he was able to explain how he had reached that tier. That's all the insight I can provide. I mean, I don't really know much about it besides that. It wasn't in my psych class.
Gotcha, but you've seen it before.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah. Lauren, can you share out a little bit about Maslow's? I see you've seen this before.
Yes, in every psych class I've taken, we always go over this, so I know it. It's basically like you can't move on to the next tier. Like everyone starts off at physiological needs, and you can't move on to the next tier unless you've satisfied those needs. So like if you don't have shelter, you can't get to safety or love and belonging. Like you're stuck at the tier you're something.
Yeah, totally. Thank you. Yeah, and there's a lot of there's agreements and disagreements on this in terms of, well, if you have maybe you don't have all the shelter and the food and the air that you need, but can you still be meeting the need of love and belonging? And I think at this point it's a little bit more fluid than it in terms of like, oh, it can only be step by step, but I think it's a really good survey of like, what do people need? There's the basics, you need water, you need food, you need to be in a safe place, and you need connection, and you need to be respected. And all of that is what helps people to be self-actualized or like their best self. Amy, I see your hand. Is there something you want to add to this?
Yeah, and I don't know if you were going in this direction, but
go for it.
Specifically speaking about children, a lot of times children can't fluidly move between these because they are not emotionally mature enough. So when we're dealing with children, we need to be sure that the bottom levels are being met in their lives in order for them to be full functioning little humans. So we need them to have their physiological needs met, that they have good sleep, food, shelter, clothing, right? That their safety needs are being met before they can focus on, let's say, employment, which would be school, right? Before they focus on their schoolwork, we need to make sure that those things are being met in their lives, because not having those met in their lives will make it that much harder for them to focus. And that's where I feel like Maslow's hierarchy of needs relates to children in the context that we're using it.
Yeah, absolutely. And there are lots of perspectives on this. Another one might be that you need a little bit of everything. You need survival needs met. You need, love and belonging needs met. You need to have some sense of fun. You need to have some sense of freedom or choice. We talked about that yesterday with respect. And you need to have some sense of identity or sense of self. So there's lots of different models for thinking about this, but I wanted to look at the fact that needs are there's like physical needs and there's emotional needs, and they kind of go hand in hand in a lot of ways. And yeah, absolutely, you're right. Hunger is a big one. I think that we see a lot with food insecure students. You know, hey, you can't focus because your body is not being nourished in the ways that it needs to be. And I mean, that's a huge part of why we have supper and snack in the way that we do, so that all of our students have access to that. I see in the chat, Amy says, yep, all right. And needs can be, the emotional needs can also be more complicated and more specific. So some needs might be honesty, you know, knowing that you can trust someone, comfort, feeling safe, stimulation. I think we talked about that a lot with like students who get bored and they really need like a little bit more to engage them. Space or independence, inclusion, feeling like they belong somewhere, order or routine, that kind of goes along with safety. And this list goes on and on. There's actually a link here that I can gladly share with anyone if they like. That's from the Center for Nonviolent Communication, and it puts words to a lot of these needs. So we got the basics, and the basics need to be met. And there are also these emotional needs. So that different barriers may be preventing students from accessing, so like inclusion, or that just aren't being met for some reason, whether that's in the student's life outside of school, whether that's being overlooked in the tutoring session. So we have our strengths hat on, seeing what the student is doing well, and we are also going to have our needs hat on, and figuring out, hey, what do we need to change? What do we need to be proactive about? So let's look at these behaviors again. And I kind of want you to pick the one that you already picked. And I want us to look at it through that needs perspective. What might the student be needing and not getting if they're exhibiting one of these behaviors? And I'm going to read them again and notice if anything is sort of shifting for you or you're feeling different in your body. I think we talked about, you know, hey, I got this hot button, and I want to see how you think about or what you're thinking about that. So here we go. Dishonesty, getting anxious or easily upset, tattling, shutting down or avoiding a task or conversation, or disrupting the session. So talking through this, I would like to hear someone who picked dishonesty as the behavior and talk about what a student who's being dishonest might be needing. Maybe if they're being, let's be specific, like, oh, they're being dishonest about homework. I would like to get a volunteer. All right, let's go with Leslie, and then let's go with Abigail.
I had picked shutting down, but also dishonesty is a very important for me. I would say dishonesty, maybe what the student is looking for is just more guidance. Just you need to put into perspective of the child of why homework is important and why lying about it can like just lead to not consequences, but like just negative impact on their future. Just talking to them more like of how this can impact in like of their future, and why, you know, leaving, like, teachers don't leave homework just to like mess with them, you know, that it is important to have that practice. So I would say maybe just having that one-on-one talk, and then just talking to that student of why homework is important. Yeah.
So what I'm hearing is that maybe the need that's not being met is for them to understand why homework is important and kind of to have a personal connection to it.
Yeah.
Okay, okay. Anybody want to add on to that or share another answer? I think I saw Abigail.
Yeah. So I would say reinsurance. Most of the time, I feel like when a kid will lie, is just trying to impress in a way, or trying to be like, oh, just letting them know that it's okay to be wrong and it's okay if they need help. Because sometimes they'll be like, oh, I finished it, because they're afraid to ask, like, why I got stuck in this problem, or I'm not sure what to do here. And yeah, just letting them know that it's okay. And yes, there's consequences about it, but also just making sure that they know that it's sometimes okay to, need help and ask for help.
Thank you. Yeah, I appreciate both of you sharing that. And I'm hearing maybe there can be a balance where eventually we want to be able to explain, like you were saying, Leslie, hey, we still got to make sure that we do the homework. But maybe the need is, oh, I'm scared to be wrong. And so I just say, oh, I don't have anything, I don't need to do it, or I'm already done. And maybe they actually do need that extra help. Thank you. I want to hear from a couple more people. And we're going to move to our next. Was there someone else raise their hand? No, that was Abigail. I would like to hear from someone who picked the behavior anxious or easily upset, or a student who is really sensitive. What do you think that student needs? Or what is that need that's maybe not being met?
I think that they need a space or the chance to easily express their passion or convey their emotions. That just seems like a green flag for me on what they need. And I really feel like that would help them ease their anxiousness and calm their nerves.
Thank you. So maybe having an outlet, being able to express themselves in a way that's going to be healthy.
Exactly, yeah.
Awesome. Let's pick a couple more. Did anybody pick tattling as their behavior? Give me 1 second. All right, Callan.
I did, but I'm still confused on how to think about like other
Sure.
ways to.
Yeah.
I would like some help.
Okay. Would anybody like to help Callan out in terms of what a student might be needing when they're tattling, when they're, coming to the teacher or the tutor about every little thing that's going on? Anybody want to put their thinking hat on? Amy, go for it.
So one of the things that the students might need is a sense of security, to make sure, they know where those boundaries are and everyone else is following the same boundaries.
Thank you. And let's see. I see Lauren also says fairness. Can you speak to that a little bit, Lauren?
Yes, I noticed that the students who tattle a lot, they have like a strong sense of justice and they want to make sure it's carried out. So I didn't want to put justice. I was trying to find another word that's not as like harsh, but they're really concerned with fairness and making sure everything's fair for others.
Gotcha. So that actually might be a place where we're able to bring in some of that, restorative justice, instead of having it be about like people getting what they quote unquote deserve. Like, hey, I see you really want this to be fair, so let's find a way that it's going to work out for everyone. And let's try and build that together. Yeah. So instead of being like, oh my gosh, you're telling again, it might be that student, I think justice is a great word for it, honestly. Does that help you out a little bit, Callan? That those might be things that student needs?
Yeah, Abigail, did you want to put something in too?
I think I saw, yeah. Oh, did you have your hand raised, Abigail?
Yeah, for the most part, whenever I have dealt with like students or my siblings when they're telling on someone, it's also they also kind of want to have that sense of kind of authority in a way. Like, hey, like this, like I'm seeing this, like I matter too, like I can help out too, so giving them that, like, yes, like the attention in a way, like I feel like it's also something that they're looking for, like a way kind of to please you. Yeah, I feel like it's kind of like that.
Sure. So maybe they're looking for connection. And like, hey, I'm doing the right thing. Look at me. That could be another piece. Let's do does that help you out a little bit? I'm sorry, I think I already asked that.
The answer is
a
yes.
couple of different
Thank you.
perspectives. Awesome. Yeah.
Thank you, everyone.
I think that can be kind of a challenging one. I would even add, like, maybe that student needs to feel believed. If something's been going on and they're like, okay, well, no one is believing me, or they're saying I don't want to hear it and I need somebody to hear me. And maybe our first guess, like, oh, this student needs a place to express themselves, or oh, this student needs leadership. It might not be what they need, but it's about trying, and it's about trying to meet those needs first. And maybe we're wrong the first couple of times, so that's why you keep going. Again, permission to be imperfect. Let's do the last two behaviors, because I'm really liking the conversation that's going on here. And I'd like to hear someone share about, oh, Jessica, what's up?
Oh yeah, I was gonna answer about shutting down.
Please answer about shutting down or avoiding a task or conversation.
So the interesting thing about shutting down is you would think that the person that shuts down, they want you to leave them alone, give them their time. But actually, in reality, they actually want attention, not in a bad way, not negative attention. Like they want you to talk to them. And it's sometimes hard to tell that because people that shut down, they're very thoughtful people and they have a hard time putting their thoughts into words. Like they don't communicate right. They don't know how. So they kind of need that help from another person to just be there and talk. Even if they're not responding to you, they're not talking back, they're listening to everything that you're saying and they're keeping it in mind. And they're very thoughtful, emotional people, but in their heads. And yeah, so that can help person that shuts down.
Thank you. Yeah, so maybe that person does need to be heard, or maybe that person might need to know, oh, I'm not going to leave you. I'm not going to leave you. Sure. Yeah. And I do want to add to this. I really want to put the word might in here. This might be what that person needs, because we don't always know for sure if, like, I think that, like, we can only be the expert on ourselves. So we're sort of learning from our students as we get to know them. And by like the middle of the year, you might know, oh yeah, when this student is like shuts down, I know it's because they want to talk and they just don't know how to say it. But especially in the start of the year, I think it's good to put in this might or this maybe. Did I see a hand up? All right, let's do one more. Disrupting the session. What do you think that student might need that's sort of not being met? Did anybody pick that behavior? All right, in the chat, this kid who's disrupting the session is in need for some attention. Yeah, for sure. Yeah, like I said, I think attention seeking is connection seeking. Anybody want to add to Jose's answer in terms of disrupting a session or being kind of a class clown, maybe? I think we touched on this one earlier. Trinity says completely agree. I'm going to add what we talked about with the video, positive feedback. Thank you, Amy. And maybe also, I'm actually going to put like stimulation or something to do. Maybe they're bored. Maybe they don't understand the point of what's being done. or heard or understood. Awesome. Yeah, I'm gonna add, maybe they're bored. They need a little bit more of a challenge. They need, maybe they need to be doing multiple things. I'm actually somebody who, like, a lot of times in class, I need to be like doodling because I'm like overstimulated. And so recognition that they do know what they're talking about. Yeah, and maybe even talking time. How much talking time do students often get in school or at home to just kind of share about things? I definitely was a kid who blurted out a lot and got in trouble for that. So that one's kind of personal. All right. Looking for approval by others, or probably feels like the lesson might be boring or too easy. Yeah, absolutely. I think you are all really getting the hang of this, and I love to see the way that you're thinking through it. Anybody want to add any other behaviors that maybe we haven't talked about, and you're like, I don't know what kind of a need this could show, or I don't know what kind of a strength this could show?
Maybe one that hits a lot, like why do you hit other students?
Sure. Anybody want to help out with that one? Let's try with that one through needs. What do you think that student might need? An outlet for excess energy. Thanks, Amy. Anybody else? Anger is a secondary emotion. Say a little about that, Abigail. What do you mean?
From what I've been teach is anger is usually like a secondary emotion. So there's obviously before you get anger, there has to be like frustration, probably sad, or sometimes disappointment. And sometimes, so you have to deep inside to see what actually caused the student to lash out in anger or hit somebody. Probably the student got frustrated at something, or probably got hurt by something that the other student said. So always trying to dip in and figure it out what was the main cause of it.
And what do y'all think about maybe they need a way to express their anger that doesn't involve hitting someone, or express their feelings that involves keeping their hands to themselves? And I see Amy, we had a student, maybe that's the only form of communication at home. Yeah, so thank you, Ernesto. It could mean they witness domestic abuse often or be a victim of it. Yeah, we don't know for sure, but when we're thinking about this needs perspective or like trauma perspective, yeah, you want to kind of think about what could this be showing, and be curious about that and be attentive to that. And Amy says we had a student who had a crush on another student and would hit them. And what do you think that student would need in order to like change the behavior? I just want to take that example because it really shows that like students will do anything. Jessica, go for it.
I feel like it probably all starts from home. Like maybe the only sort of love that they receive is tough love. And that's the only way they know how to express their love to others too, by being tough or mean, but only because they just want to see you succeed as a person too. But they kind of come off as negative or rude.
Yeah, so maybe we start with helping them feel safe and encouraged, in a way that looks different from that tough love. And maybe once you're able to do that, you're able to bring in some ways to, like you said, Abigail, express feelings in a healthier way. Or even just be able to say, I'm angry instead of hitting. Like that could be a really big difference for that student. And if it's happening with one student, it may be happening with more than one. So I love all of the looking at these behaviors that y'all are doing. And I think it's also showing that there's more than one answer to each one. It's not like a plug and play, like, oh, this is always what it means if someone's dishonest, or this is always what it means if somebody is avoiding a task. But what we're really looking at is every student is different, and we want to see what's sort of not being met and how can we start to meet it. And if you remember our training in the spring, we also talked a lot about learning disabilities and neurodivergence, and like, what are the needs that are not being met for those students? Someone may be hitting because they're overwhelmed by the environment around them, and they're like saying, stop, stop, don't get closer to me. And students have the right to set those boundaries. So if you ever want to talk more about that, or you don't really remember that training, you want to get a refresher, please come talk to me. That is a really important topic to me, and I'm happy to continue to talk about that with you. But moving on, making sure that we got enough time with our needs perspective. How do we meet these needs? We've already sort of talked about it. Sometimes it might be through curriculum, in terms of, all right, I'm having a lot of students who are really struggling with anger, and I want to do an SEL lesson and, you know, talk about anger, or maybe do a restorative circle and talk about what are some times that you feel angry and what do you do when you're feeling that way. We'll be doing a circle together when we do our lab next week. So you'll get to see that in practice. And then also, like I said, on day one, you'll be training, hopefully with Nora, to learn how to facilitate that. So curriculum and activities might be one way of meeting those needs. Individual and group relationships could be another way. Collaboration could be another way. Maybe the student really does need extra support, or if their family really needs extra support, and that's where talking to coaching, talking to leads, and seeing if another program or another local resource is going to be able to help them comes in. That'd be true a lot with those basic physical needs, safety and food and shelter and all of that. And we also meet these needs by being able to safely supervise our students and kind of adhere to those basic standards. That way, KEEP feels like a safe and consistent place for them all the time. And they're not just kind of going, oh my gosh, what do I expect Monday? What do I expect Tuesday? And so on. So I'd like to maybe hear from a couple of you with the behaviors that we've been talking about. What's one way that you might be able to, what's one other way that you might be able to meet that need in session? So maybe for the student who needs a way of expressing themselves, can you think of one thing that you might be able to quickly do with that student? If, let's say, there's you and like a couple of other tutors, how would you help them to express themselves when they're feeling anxious?
I think at my school, myself, along with other tutors, I can specifically remember one actual event where the children were just, super high energy. Clearly, maybe they weren't staying on task as well as they should have been. And it was just a really hectic day. And what I came to the conclusion of, and the other tutors agreed with, was that maybe let's just take a chance to ask them some questions. So we asked them, like, how do you guys think you guys did today? Like, were you guys on track? Do you guys think that you were being respectful or behaving? And they were just giving us insight and feedback, like, yeah, we weren't behaving like we normally do today. And we just came to the conclusion that tomorrow is going to be a better day. And it was, I think it really helped for them to hear our insight in a positive way, and then for them to be able to express maybe why they were so high energy and a little bit chaotic that day. So that really helped. Just I want to say class, because I guess it is sort of a big class. We got the whole class's feedback, and they heard from us in a better light. The I don't want to say mistakes, but the things that they were doing that maybe shouldn't have been doing. And I know, like, as a child, when you're in trouble, or at least in my experience, when I was in trouble, and I was reprimanded, it wasn't in such a nice tone. It wasn't with appropriate language. So I think it was nice for them to hear us using appropriate wording to convey how their actions weren't on point. Yeah. I know that kind of dragged, but that was my answer.
No, thank you for sharing that. So one way might be, that sounds like a form of relationship building and relationship with your whole class. Like, hey, what do you think was different about today? And how can we have a better day tomorrow? And you might even ask them, like, specifically, what are you going to do different? And that can go along with responsibility and holding people accountable. So I appreciate your answer. And maybe if we're talking about like a single student who's really anxious, one thing that I can think of just kind of off the top of my head right now might be like, if they've got like a lot of extra energy, might be like, hey, I got a piece of paper and I want you to keep crumpling this piece of paper up. Just like having something to do with their hands. Just little things like that. I think being able to think on your feet and be creative is a really important part of this. Amy, go for it.
Yeah, we had a student who absolutely despised writing a summary every day. And so one of the things that we did for that student was, after they were done writing the summary, they could do one of two things, and we switched it up. They could either crumple it up and throw it away, or rip it up and throw it away to express their anger at the fact that they absolutely had to do it. Or they could go online and find instructions for making a paper airplane with their summary. So they could do something they liked after they finished their summary with the summary, or they could just express their anger, and it would change day to day what they wanted to do, right? Some days they were feeling more angry and they just wanted to rip that thing up and throw it in the trash. Other days they were like, I want to build a paper airplane, and they would build a paper airplane. So those are some of the ways that we allowed our students to express their emotions, but still require them to do what they needed to do.
Thanks, Amy. Yeah. And I like that one because it offers, hey, different alternatives. You know, it can be this one thing or it can be the other, and there's nothing wrong with either choice. And I think this really goes to show the value of creativity, and coming up with those things that are going to work for your students. And that involves, you know, knowing your students. So I think that also shows the value of, like, if you're kind of stuck with, hey, I have no idea how I'm going to do this with this particular student, that's another part of where we come in with coaching, and where leads come in, and where captains come in, because maybe you don't have the answer, but maybe you know, you and I, or you and Amy, or you and Osahan, or someone can come to it together. So that's a part of why we have that support system as one that we're building. So lots of different ways of meeting those needs depending on what they are. And of course there are the basics. Oh, okay, this style of communication might show that someone is not safe, and do I need to make a mandated reporting call? And again, that's what your support team is for, helping you make those decisions and you know, follow the structures that are set in place intended to keep our students safe. So with that, I think that is about the end of our section on needs. All right, so here's our last little piece of this training. And what about you? So I hope that throughout all of this talking about perspectives, all of this reframing, all of this mindset changing, I've made it pretty clear that, one, we're not perfect. Again, my motto, we're not superheroes. And that reframing these needs doesn't mean that you ignore your own feelings or that it's wrong to have them. That's why I mentioned the like, hey, it's okay to have these hot button issues, or this happened with a student and it was really frustrating for me. I believe very, very strongly, and evidence also supports this, that acknowledging what you feel, either like physically in your body, oh, I'm holding tension, oh, I'm feeling nauseous, oh, I feel this warmth in my face, I'm flushing. So either acknowledging like what you feel in your body or like labeling your emotions without judgment is a really strong way of like moving forward, so that you can kind of release that frustration rather than bottling it up or saying, I shouldn't be frustrated, I should be grateful, I should be being better, all of that. We're not perfect, we're human. With that, I think it's also really, really important to acknowledge triggers. And that's why I mentioned those, hey, which one of these behaviors kind of sets you off the most? Because sometimes it's about shared experiences. There's usually a reason. I think some people shared in the chat that like, hey, dishonesty really sets me off because of this. That's actually my hot button behavior, because when I'm working with someone and I realize that they're being dishonest, I feel taken advantage of. And that's something that's happened a lot for me in the past. So it's like all of my old stuff then gets kind of projected onto this person. So if you know that you have these sorts of triggers with coworkers or with students, it's important to acknowledge them, and coaching is a really good place to talk this through. Come up with a plan for how you're going to deal with it, what it's going to look like, what kinds of supports that you need. I think the better that you know yourself, the more you can support your teammates, and you can lean on each other in a way that's going to sort of balance the load and not be super overwhelming for one person where someone else, you know, doesn't even notice. So I really hope that I've made that clear, that you are allowed to have these feelings, and that it'll be better to acknowledge them, whatever that looks like for you. And with that, of course, you know, self-care, 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 but we've talked about that about a million times. And I just wanted to give you one tool for this, something that you can do during breaks or before or after your session, or maybe even before or after difficult conversations with students, depending on the timing and your availability. So I'm calling this a 3-minute check-in, just in terms of awareness. So you can set a timer on your phone, or you can, you know, look at a clock. You don't have to be closing your eyes or anything for it. It's not really like a meditation. It's really just a check-in. And in minute 1, you start to just sort of focus on your current state. In general, where are you at? What's going on? How are you feeling? Without judgment or trying to change it. Maybe it is, I am really stressed out right now. That is what it is. And that's minute 1. Minute 2, you sort of start to narrow and anchor yourself, and focus on your breath and kind of narrow attention to that one thing. It doesn't mean that you have to be completely blank. It doesn't mean that you don't have any thoughts in your head. It just means that when you have thoughts, you go back to your breathing. Is the air hot or cold? Is there a fan going on? Are you breathing through your nose, through your mouth? Just focusing. And then minute 3 is focusing on being in your body. What needs your attention? Are you hungry? Are you thirsty? Do you need to stretch? And with those 3 minutes, you know, you've really started to take stock of how you're feeling. And maybe it is, I was very anxious after I saw someone else being anxious. I need to go just like drink some water or do something different. I choose 3 minutes because time is short, time is precious. And I think this is a pretty simple one to remember. If you like strategies like this, please reach out to me. I have so many more, and I'm happy to share with you. I'm happy to tweak this. I'm even happy if you say like, hey, sketch, I really don't like this and I want to do something else, like, let's talk about it. Let's figure it out together. But I want you to be able to take care of yourselves in whatever ways is necessary. And it might be something that you can share with students as well. Maybe they need to check in with themselves. Maybe you can build it into a session. It's all up to you and what you feel works best and what's healthiest for you. So with that, we are almost done with this training. You all have been really, really awesome. And I want to go back to what we talked about in the start of this, with review and rewriting your story. So we talked about what was one, behavior that you kind of got in trouble for as a child. I think we talked about dishonesty. We talked about being, anxious or scared to be somewhere. We talked about avoiding a homework assignment. And I want to look at this through these two perspectives. So first of all, think about the memory you were talking about. And I want to have a couple people share out what strength might your action have shown as a child? Did it maybe tie in with a strength that you have? Or was a strength that you have maybe a reason that you acted the way that you did? Jenna, I'm remembering your example about the reading log. Can I pick on you for a minute?
Oh yeah, sure.
Yeah. So what kind of a strength do you think that you had in those times that maybe you weren't doing your reading log? Do you think it showed anything about you, or something, a strength or something that you needed?
Honestly, at the time, I'm really not sure because
That's okay.
it was just something I really
Mhm.
did not want to do.
Yeah. So maybe you were interested in other things and you were curious about other things.
Yeah, that's true. I did want to I definitely would at the time rather like play games than do homework. So that was
Mhm.
probably something.
Curious. Yeah. And can you think of any like needs that it might have shown as a child?
Maybe like probably a need to have like more fun time, I guess.
Mm-hmm.
Because
Yeah.
I guess being at school made me like drained. So I wanted to like cool off or something.
Yeah, maybe you needed a balance, or maybe you needed a way to read that didn't feel like busy work. Okay. And I'm just gonna ask you one more question. Thank you for being vulnerable and like sharing this. What do you think you could do for a student who's acting the same way?
Let's see. Well, it's easier said than done, obviously, but maybe I can like try to find a way to like find something that they're interested in and then try to like implement that into a lesson or something. It sounds hard, but it probably could be done.
No, I think you're on a great track. And Amy says right here that maybe if somebody like doesn't want to read, there might be different ways to bring reading in, like doing readers theater, which I know we have a ton of stuff in curriculum on, or yeah, maybe something hands-on, or maybe connecting to your interests. And I think I saw a hand. Was that Callan?
Hi.
Hi.
I wanted to answer the strength question as well.
Yeah, please.
I didn't want to mention it earlier because I didn't have the best headspace, but
Sure.
I feel a little bit better now. So
Go for it.
I got in trouble for having depression at
Mhm.
9 years old, and it kind of made me afraid to talk about mental health.
Mhm.
And then I started to realize that a lot of other students my age, like in middle school, were going through like depressive episodes and stuff. And I feel like it taught me to have more empathy and compassion and understanding for everyone. So when I meet, like, I notice that I need that too, but I feel like it's also like a basic need that everybody needs. And I had when I was talking to my students in my last few months at my site, uh, there was a student who was going through something like that, and I did my best to, show them that compassion that they really needed. And they said, I don't really have people who speak to me this way. I don't really have people who acknowledge me like this. And I'm really grateful. So I felt like my depression would never be a strength for me. It would always be my weakness, and that it wouldn't help me succeed. But now that I've reworked that thought, I've used it to help a lot of people. So
Thank you so much for sharing that. I know that can be really, really vulnerable. So it sounds like maybe, it did show empathy and it did show caring, and it also showed that, things mattered to you a lot. And I mean, I'm sure that you can probably address that. Can you share maybe what needs and yeah, I guess you sort of shared what you would do for students. Can you think of any needs that sort of needed to be met with that?
I spoke about, like, giving them compassion, empathy, and
Yeah.
recognition, because just like how it's hard for us to be vulnerable with our students, it's even harder for them to be vulnerable with us, because if we are willing to show them trust, it's going to be harder for them to trust us because of what they've seen. But as for us, we've kind of gone through the experiences, and we know that it's hard. And so if we can show that to the students, being like, yeah, if you allow yourself to be vulnerable and respect and understand others with their own vulnerabilities, it would like push them to, be that kind of leader in support.
I love that. Thank you. And I apologize. My dog actually started barking, and I missed a couple of things that you said, so I appreciate you repeating it. But okay, yeah, absolutely. And I hope what this is showing, I think that we all have these stories that we can look back and rewrite. And I think that being able to do that and recognize our strengths and our needs can also help us be ready to work with students who are acting the same way. Because sometimes that happens, there's an echo of you in a kid that you're working with, or that one of your fellow tutors or site partners is working with. So thank you for sharing, both of you. I really appreciate it. And I'm hoping that for all of you who maybe did not share or were thinking about it yourself, that there might be something to this, and different strengths that that you might have shown. So with that, we're just gonna do final reflections, and I'll give you a reminder for training. So I'd like you to share in the chat something that you're gonna take away from this conversation on our restorative mindsets, or that you think you might use while tutoring. So I'll wait to see that in the chat. And I'll also let you know our last training days are gonna be the 26th and 27th. The venue is going to be Purpose Church, but we are in a classroom building. It's classroom building A. I think there will probably be a reminder going out about that. Topics are going to be safety and supervision, and then doing a 2-week survival guide, and ideally prep with your school site. So be ready for that. Make sure that you have uploaded your notes So for these past 3 trainings, because we are done with the online portion, yay. And with that, yeah, I just want to hear some reactions in the chat, things that you're gonna take away from this.
Hello, Cynthia. My name is Betty Reed. I'm calling from
I see the power of perspective. Thank you, Jose. Keeping in mind what we can offer students. Awesome. Looking at different behaviors in a positive way, being open-minded, framing behaviors as needs and strengths. I love it. Please feel free, as always, to keep talking to me about this. If we need to figure out specific examples, or you're like, I have no idea what to do with this thing that I've never seen before, that is a part of my role. So I'm really excited that y'all are taking this away from this training. And if there's anything that was confusing or that you want to go over together, again, I am here to help. So with that, I am going to stop